Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I am a comic book artist, writer, creator, self publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you would like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, be able to read my comic books on an online digital archive, get access to a Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share tips, feedback, process, and more, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI and check it out. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, get work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Comixology or Kindle, you can head on over to amazon.jeremy.net. There you can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It is a self-contained story. It's a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. Or you can pick up my most recent comic book, Morning Star. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8. It's the story of Lucifer's fall from heaven as a Western. Both volumes have extensive back matter, character sketches, page layouts, thumbnails, and more. I have photo reference in there. I show you basically how I put the entire comic book together. You can check all those out in print and digital at amazon.jeremy.net. All right, so what am I drawing today? Here we go. No wonder it looks so weird. I'm all super zoomed in. Kingslow Fitness in the chat already. How you doing, brother? How's it going? Continuing work on this Medusa piece. I hadn't made a lot of progress between last week and this week. Main thing that I am doing here is I have thicker lines for the outer regions of the figure, and I save thinner lines for the detailed areas on the inside. So I guess what I'm trying to do right now is balance the line weights. And really that's going in here and taking some of the lines that are a little too thick and thinning them out. Some of the lines that are a little too thin and thickening them. It's a delicate balance. And to be honest, I probably shouldn't be as precious about it as I am, because what I want really is to get to the point where I can capture those differences in thick and thin more instinctually. When I say more instinctually, I mean just train my hand to do it without me having to try so hard. And really, that just comes with practice. That comes with time. That's the only way to get there. So what I'm doing right now, I guess, is line weight practice. And being able to use line weight as a visual controlling device is very important, both for showing where to direct the eye, creating a sense of background versus foreground, detail versus unimportant detail. For instance, a lot of times, even though in this piece, because it's not a huge panoramic background behind the figure, but a lot of times when I'm drawing environments, what I will do is the same level of detail, the thinner line weights that I am using for detail in here, I will use those thin line weights exclusively in the background, but I won't have these thicker lines that give it a bolder silhouette. So it's almost like everything that's within the container of the bold lines is the stuff that I'm emphasizing. And then by drawing lines using this exact same thin, delicate line weight, but using them without having a bolder silhouette, those are, will subconsciously read as background elements. fact, let's see what happens if I really stop futzing around and just go. Well, you know what? Ordinarily, I really wouldn't try so hard and struggle so hard to get these lines just right. But it's because it's all flowing lines. That's the reason why I'm coming in here and drawing and redrawing, tweaking and changing. And I even have slight brush smoothing turned on. Normally, I'll draw with 0 brush smoothing, and you can change brush smoothing for an individual brush. What I have found works a little bit better for me, although it doesn't seem to be working great right now, is if you're drawing in Procreate, what I do is I go to the preferences, and under the preferences, well, I can show you right here. Under the main preferences, it has pressure and smoothing. And if you turn that on, I have the smoothing set at just about 25%. And normally I have it on 0, but 25% gives me just enough smoothing to an arc that it eliminates a lot of the little tiny jitters in the hand. You know, in most apps, Procreate, Clip Studio Paint, they have some form of brush smoothing set on there, or a setting where you can go in and adjust that. But I guess the thing is I keep drawing and redrawing because they're coming out slightly thicker than I'd like. But at the same time, this serpent right here in the middle of the figure, this feels too thin. And that is the delicate balance that I'm trying to walk. I'm trying to get it where it feels thinner than the outer lines, but thicker than that particular serpent right there. And it might seem counterintuitive, but what I actually just did right now is I made my brush size slightly larger. But I make my brush size slightly larger so that I can use less pressure on the stylus. When I'm pushing down on my tablet, now, because the brush size is a little bit thicker, instead of applying pressure, I can just sort of drag it across and glide it across. And that gives me a little bit more control of the fluidity. So I'm trying that approach and seeing how that works. Let's see here. King's Low Fitness says thick to thin to thick, combination mix versus separate, thick by itself, thin by itself. Yes, exactly. All of those things, those different types of line weights say different things about the piece. And, you know, I'm sure that there's ways in which you can use thick lines to express background and thin lines to express foreground. It depends on how well you use them. Anytime that there's a quote unquote rule, you can find an exception, or you can find an interesting way to flip those rules on its head and express different ideas. I always like to throw that caveat out there because, you know, there's a reason why the expression rules are made to be broken exists, but there's a reason why the expression you have to learn the rules before you can break them also exists. I seem to have taken a chunk out of one piece up here. See, that's a little too thick. That's about right. You know what? Actually, it'd be worth it to have to come in here and do some erasing. But I want to get this line right by just saying screw it. I'm just going to draw through. Well, no, I understand now why this is like this. It's because that is the right side of the serpent, or that's the left side of the serpent. This is the right side of the same serpent. Sometimes looking at my sketch, even though I drew it, looking at my roughs, I will forget why a certain line is the way it is, and I have to mentally recalibrate to get it to where I need it to be. Let's move this down here. And there is a thing that I constantly have to remind myself, constantly, of all of the rules that I give myself. The one that I forget the most while I'm digitally inking is I have to tell myself, remember to draw. And what I mean by that is that tracing, the reason why tracing has such a quote unquote bad or negative connotation is because when you're tracing mindlessly, drawings tend to feel lifeless, just a lifeless copy. And it's very easy, even when you're inking your own work, digitally or traditionally, it's very easy to fall into a habit of just putting down lines and marks that are just copying what's underneath. And what I have to constantly remind myself is don't just mindlessly copy. Try, even though I have these guidelines there, and I'm trying to respect the guidelines, to try and draw this as though it's me putting down the marks for the first time, to actually draw, not just trace. I think that's a reason why a lot of the best inkers are also great draftsmen in their own right. Like I remember a lot of the times my earliest exposure to the work of P. Craig Russell is him inking a lot of early Mike Mignola. And I mean, if you look at P. Craig's art, his work is fantastic. He is a very different artist on his own right from Mignola. But you can see how much the rounder forms and figures, the less abstract geometric forms. It's like the early Mignola and the early P. Craig Russell kind of made a separate, unique artist. And when you see P. Craig Russell on his own, he's way more organic feeling than Mignola. But you can see some of that abstraction that's in Mignola's work. And then when you see Mignola on his own, his is much more of geometric forms and shapes and blocks. But it's almost like a little bit of the undercurrent of what P. Craig Russell maybe bled into him. So they're both very different from each other in their own right, but you can see flavors of them both. Hey, I see Mercidian Merchant is in the chat, watching on Twitch. Thank you for dropping in. I'm just working on some illustrations here, doing a little digital inking of a Gorgon, which is a Medusa. I see my boy Amar's over here. How you doing, Amar? Good to see you. See ya. I'm streaming on multiple platforms, so when I'm mentioning different people, so unless I show the actual chat on the screen, if you're watching on different platforms, you may not see the other people. So I've got people chatting on YouTube, people chatting on Facebook, and people chatting on Twitch. But if I'm going into in depth about a particular comment, then I'll usually try to remember to post it on the screen as we go. But thank you for dropping in. And I can tell you right now that I am breaking another rule in that I am zoomed in too close. I really don't need to be looking at this closely in order to ink this. In fact, zooming out will help me properly assess that problem I was talking about of having the lines be too thick or too thin. Let's see here. Mercadian Merchant says, "Hello, other unseen people." I've been streaming on YouTube for many years now, so not a lot of viewers on Twitch. So I appreciate you. A lot of the comments are more from the YouTube YouTube platform. Let's see here. Amar says 2 more days and I will be unemployed. So now this will be a test for me. It's time to drink the hyperfuel and get this art, comics, and animation together. Well, I'm sorry to hear that you are out of a gig, but I remember that the last time that I was unemployed for a large length of time, that I used that opportunity to finish Eye of the Gods. So it was a stressful time and it was a rough time, but I stayed busy and made use of it. So I'm glad to see that you have the same attitude of you're gonna, sit down and focus on getting some work done. But I hope that you're able to move to something that you find at least equally as enjoyable, if not more enjoyable than your previous gig. Going through career changes can be rough. Let's see here. Kingslow Fitness said, I went there literally copying, tracing over Jack Kirby's Captain America. I had to stop that immediately. Well, the funny thing is, Kirby is one of those artists whose line work is so powerful and so alluring that you really kind of want to just dive in and capture all of that power on the page. He is one of those artists who I think inking faithfully, literally tracing exactly what he has down, his work is so powerful that I think he's one of the guys that you kind of can get away with it. But that said, I am not a Jack Kirby scholar, but you can go through and do a deep dive on the different artists who have inked him. There's Joe Sinnott, who he co-created Captain America with. He's a longtime collaborator. A lot of people really love his inks by Mike Royer. I think that I'm not sure how much Marvel stuff versus DC stuff Royer inked, but my chance to view a lot of it was a Mr. Miracle artist edition that my wife got me as a present. So I got a chance to see some of those inks up close. And then there's Vinnie Coletta, who some people say is the greatest Kirby inker. Some people say he's the worst Kirby inker because there were whole areas that were either too detailed or he just felt didn't necessarily lend to parts of the overall drawing. And he would just erase certain things and not redraw Kirby, but he would just ink what was necessary to get the story done. And some people thought that's blasphemy, changing the lines of the master. But at the same time, he got the books out on time, which if you got a guy who's fast enough to draw 5 pages a day, you need an inker that's equally as fast. That's very hard to do. I haven't studied it enough, but I can see both sides of the argument. Wanting to adhere as closely as possible to the spirit of the lines Kirby put down, while at the same time, somebody who's like, look, he's preparing the pages for print. He's going to make them look however they need to look good in print. And he got the job done. So, yeah. I'm taking a mulligan there. I see both. I see the pros and cons of each, and I have not looked at enough Kirby work, even though I have a few different books on him, to really have a good sense of my own personal opinion of who is the best Kirby inker. But I will tell you that I really like those Mike Royer Mr. Miracle inks. I'm sure if there's anybody here who is a deep Kirby fan, we could definitely go down a rabbit hole. People start commenting on that. So let's see here. Art with Amar says, I'll be spending probably the rest of the year focusing on writing, getting a business set up, getting the IP stuff together. And he says, I am hoping that was the last corporate job for me. Well, good luck to you. I really hope that it is, that you get this up and running. King's Love Fitness says, I'm going through Hyperfuel on an art and programming. See, Amar says, my life would be a lot happier, and I feel if I do what I have planned, I won't have to go back to the job again. And Mercidium Merchant asks, may I ask if this Medusa Gorgon is part of a larger work? Well, it is not part of a larger work in the sense that it's part of a comic book. What I've been doing is I am currently writing my next comic that I'm going to do, and it's not going to be ready for me to draw for probably a few more months. So I've been doing standalone illustrations, and I have a ton of Gorgon sketches in my sketchbook. A lot of them really inspired by a trip I took to Florence, Italy, several years ago with my wife. And I've just been trying to go through what I'm using this time between starting my next comic book series and completing my most recent one, is I'm using it to do illustrations that have just been sitting in my sketchbook for a long time. And I've been making prints out of them and t-shirts out of them. Let me see if I've got the Medusa piece in here. The most recent one that I finished is, here we go. This one kind of has two names. I call it Medusa, but I also call it Snakes on a Mane, because, you know, the pun and the fact that I thought, you know, what if a horse's mane was all made out of serpents? So I like taking ideas that are kind of traditional classic ideas and giving them kind of a bizarre twist to them, just kind of freaking them out, giving them my own unusual flavor. But I've also been experimenting with these individual illustrations with actual technique, with process. So another recent piece that I did is, I call this one Gorgon Entwined. And so it's the idea of a Medusa, you know, a Gorgon, you know, having, I guess, a lover or a husband or a consort or whatever, and he's turned to stone, but they're actually sort of in this, you know, in this warm embrace. But not just a matter of me doing this particular illustration in terms of a different concept, but also the fact that there's no line work here. I've been experimenting, you know, as I mentioned at the top of this live stream, that I'm mostly a comic book artist. So I tend to do pencils, rough sketch, pencils, inks, and flat color. Most of my comics are black and white with gray tones, but when I do color, it tends to be flat color with maybe a little bit of rendering. And I wanted to experiment with actually trying to digitally paint more. So this piece is more of a digital painting. The Snakes on a Mane that I showed you is closer to my traditional comic book style. And I've been trying to find a nice melding between my comic book work and digital painting. Like, for instance, this piece right here, I call Gorgon's Lover. And this piece is what inspired both the painted one that I just showed you a minute ago, as well as, in fact, Kingsville Fitness was the one who suggested, in terms of doing this, to not just have them spooning, but maybe have it where his arm is kind of floating above hers. So he inspired that piece that I did from the other angle. And I also just wanted to try looking at this. The concept to me, I thought, was very visually strong, but this was a sketch that languished for ages. I had this as an ink traditional piece for probably 5 or 6 years and never colored it because I just felt like I was having a problem with the values, working them out, seeing them in my head. And one of the things I said was, well, let me come back to some unfinished ideas and see if I can change them and do different approaches. So, same concept, but now done with you looking at them from the side. And personally, I think that this one reads stronger than the one that I just showed you. You know, the previous one was much more murky. But then I also thought from this angle, I was trying to decide whether to do it in darkness, in moonlight, or do it candlelit. And I decided, as I've looked at the old masters, you know, looking at stuff like Rubens, looking at some of the late Renaissance artists, I found that a lot of people would do the same painting in different styles or different compositions of the same theme. So I thought, why not take the same piece and do it with different colors, different compositions, just explore it. Mainly because I think a lot of times some of the anxiety that artists may feel about making artwork comes from trying to get it right, trying to get something perfect. And I think that we can get caught up in the fact that there's a whole wide variety of choices that we can make about any given piece, the color, the composition, um, you know, the value range. There's an endless number of choices that we have to make as we're making a piece of art. I thought to myself, instead of trying to make the right choice, what if I started making all of the choices? What if I just intentionally said, whatever piece I'm doing, I may do like 3 versions of it and just see which ones resonate with people the most. Even selling them as shirts and prints, maybe making 2 different versions available for sale. So that's something that I have been experimenting with as well. Instead of trying to get everything perfect, just make multiple versions and see what draws people. So that is a very long-winded answer to your question, which most of my answers tend to be kind of long-winded because I guess when I'm drawing, I've had to kind of teach myself how to talk while drawing. And while live streaming, I've had to teach myself how to talk while drawing. And what that means is a lot of my answers tend to be kind of a slightly directed, slightly stream of conscious, just letting my mind work its way towards what I'm trying to say. And then every once in a while, I'll realize, oh, wait, I'm really way off the map here. And I'll just stop drawing for a second and say, all right, let me answer your question. So that is a long-winded answer of me explaining to you why I'm long-winded, which I know, but I'm too meta for myself. I need to get my head out of my own ass. But thank you for the question. And for anyone else watching, you are more than welcome and encouraged to ask questions while I'm drawing. Let's see here. Scroll back up. Oh yeah, and Art with Amar says to Kingslow Fitness says, good luck. If I can help, as Jeremy has, please let me know. That's always good to. Amar is quite a source of knowledge and wealth in terms of both the practical sense of making art, as well as a lot of the tech stuff. A lot of times I'll just ask him about different apps and what people are using now. So I love it when you guys are helping each other out. Greatly appreciate that. Let's see here. Kingsville Fitness says snakes on a mane is on fire. Is fire. I appreciate that, man. Thank you so much. Let's see here. Orchidean Market says, is it just me, or does it look like they are submerged in a bathtub? This one, yes, that's actually exactly what I was doing. Is I wanted to play with the idea of drawing a Gorgon, but giving them the sense of a person coming out of the water. So not necessarily a bathtub per se, but instead of coming out of water, to have them coming out of a sea of snakes, as it were. I didn't want to overdefine what this body of water is, or whether it's specifically a body of water, but I did want to capture that sense of being underneath, rising out of this pool of snakes. Because for me, I always like to have a little bit of creepy, unsettling elements in my pieces. The art that interests me the most is art where beauty and horror kind of mix. So a lot of times it tends to be that I'm either drawing something beautiful, like trying to give her these sensuous eyes that are kind of burning into you. But at the same time, I think most of us would find the idea of being inside a pool of snakes very, very unsettling. So I'm trying to combine both of those ideas, both of those elements. Let's see here. And King's Little Fitness says the Gorgon's left hand gesture. I think that was on one of the previous ones. And he says, tells a story further with the hand gestures we see today in mainstream in a sense. Yeah, hands are hands are, in my opinion, just as expressive as faces. And a lot of times, I think you can visually tell a story. You can even have people whose eyes are in shadow, where you don't even really see them, but their hand gestures can speak volumes about the piece. So I'm glad that you noticed that, and I appreciate it. Sometimes I go through little areas of silence while I'm actually concentrating. So, I'll be talking, 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 won't shut up, and all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, let me really try to get this thing I'm drawing here correct. As much as I might say blah blah blah, I can talk while I'm drawing. It is not 100%. It's not 100% a skill that I've mastered. Sometimes I will do a live stream and then I will finish the live stream. I'll go back and I'll look at the piece that I was working on during the live stream and I'll be like, oh wow, I really messed this up in like this place, that place, and the other. And I have to go back and maybe redo half of the work. Um, so I understand why there are artists who refuse to live stream while drawing. I get it. Um, but the other half of the time, things come out just fine. So, but to a certain degree, there's a weird disassociation that has to happen mentally where I have to, there's a tightrope that's always happening mentally between your attention on the words you're saying and the lines you're putting down. I'd like to think that the act of the actual inventing of the line work, the sculpting of the figure, the making becomes a little bit like an actor who has learned their lines well enough that they can just go out on the stage and just be present. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do, in that I know the sketch is me learning my lines. The under sketch is me figuring out the structure of this. What's it going to be? And then the sitting here and drawing it live while I'm talking to you guys, that's the me just going out on stage and trying to be present. Except for the fact that I'm constantly undoing and redoing lines, or drawing and erasing, putting things in there and then pulling them back out again. Let's see here. Mercidian Merchant says, let's make all the choices. I'm curious, are you more of a comic fan? Are you an illustrator? What brings you to artwork? What kind of stuff do you do or make? I mean, nowadays you can be someone who's interested in animation, or you can be interested in video games, and there's all different level of illustration art that people are interested in making, that can all overlap or can all be completely separate fields on their own. Let's see here. Mercury Merchant says, Slither soon coming to a cinema near you. Let's see here. And they say, I mostly enjoy illustration, especially character design. Yeah, character design is, it's one of those that overlaps with a lot of different fields, because you use it for animation, you use it for games, you use it for comics. Although what's odd for me is I find a lot of times I prefer to do my character design a lot of times after I've already done a large number of layouts or thumbnails for a story. So it's almost like I need to see how the character acts and the poses I'm going to be using, like almost like putting them through a run through of the story before I know what their costume needs. Because there'll be times when I will get maybe 2/3 of the way through a comic and I'll be like, okay, if I had this to do over again, I would definitely have changed the costume to eliminate this particular element, or make sure it had this other element. It's not just a matter of eliminating things that are a pain in the ass to draw, but it's also realizing that there's a feature that they need, that I may have given them a weapon, but I didn't properly design the scabbard or the sheath that will hold that weapon when they're not using it. And that would very much change the costume in ways that are subtle, but making it more functional. Which in my day job, I do a lot of product design and graphic design. And one of the longest held expressions of design is that form follows function. I think that's true in character design as well. And I need to force myself to stop zooming in so much. Actually, what I need to do, I haven't done this in a while, is flip the canvas. That's always good for just giving yourself a little bit of perspective on what you're doing. And it's something you don't tend to do so much when you're inking. You do it more in the sketch or line art stage, but that is one of the advantages of working digitally, is you can be doing it while you're inking and be like, oh wait, I'm moving stuff too much on this direction versus that direction, giving you just a little sense of ways to vary up those line weights. It's getting a little messy in here, and I need to simplify what's going on in here. In this particular region of the head right there. Need to simplify that. Mercidian says, clearly someone is enjoying the enhance a little too much. Yeah, I know that is, I think, probably the biggest downside of working digitally is the tendency to zoom in and obsess over details that should not be obsessed over. It's one of the things I need to try and consistently remind myself to spend more time flipping and rotating and less time zooming in. I think the problem I'm having here is that right now these serpents do not seem to be conforming to the shape of the head underneath it. That's what I need to fix. Things that looked really good in a sketch, now when you just go with hard, solid lines, I look at them and I'm like, oh, wait, that's just too overpowering, or it's wonky. It's not, it's fighting against the flow of the piece. Another thing is trying to capture just the right amount of fluid lines because I want a lot of these lines to have a nice serpentine flow to them. But when I draw my own, when I'm just sketching, like if I just show you my under sketch, this drawing under here is at 20% right now. If I go up to full opacity, I mean, I drew it with gray, so it's still going to be light, but I tend to draw in hatches and of straight lines. And I'll just do like a slight curve and then another line, a slight curve and another line. They're like bigger, chunkier lines as opposed to the thin, delicate look that I'm trying to achieve now. Or rather, the fluid flow of line that I'm trying to achieve. Let's see here. Mercidian Merchant asks, is it just me or does this look like a vintage movie poster? It's funny. I wasn't going for that, but I take that very much as a compliment because I think that it is giving off that vibe, like kind of like a 70s Italian horror film. I think that it does have a little bit of that feel to it, and that's a good thing. Whoops. Oh, I must be on the wrong layer. That's what it is. There we go. In fact, I should probably lock this layer to make sure I don't accidentally scribble on it. Both of these. I'm not really jumping around layers right now, so I'm not as worried about that. But locking them will prevent some unhappy accidents. I will tell you that that's one of the hardest things to, I guess, get used to. And it's probably going to screw me when I go back to working with traditional inks. Even though I'm going to ink my next comp book, I'm probably going to make my next comp book completely digitally. The fact that I can go through and refine these lines so much when I'm working traditionally, it's just what I get down, I have down. And unless I really hate that line and want to white it out and remake it, I just have to live with that. So I need to get the lines closer to what I want on the first try. But see, that's the interesting thing. When working with traditional ink and brush, I tend to enjoy those early lines, even if they're imperfect, especially if they're imperfect. I think that I'm much more forgiving of the look and feel of those lines versus with digital and how easy it is to go back and change and correct and manipulate. This feels a little bit better. Let's see here. King's Low Fitness says, I see further as you flip the canvas. Yeah, that the canvas flipping. I don't know if you ever do that when you're drawing with either Procreate or Krita or any of the apps that you use. But let's see, zooming in too much again. That flipping the canvas makes such a huge difference in terms of what you think you're drawing versus what you're getting down on the page. It is probably one of the most useful, powerful tools in art making. And again, take a drink every time I mention Carl Altstetter. He's my comic books godfather, my comics patron saint. He's the one that got me to flip my drawings, staying on me for months, even as I resisted it. And now that I do it regularly, I can't live without it. Now, this particular serpent, I have to be careful about how much I thin the line down because I'm doing the lines of a serpent that's coming closer to the edge of the picture plane, closer to the front of the view. So its body is thicker than the ones that are up in the top part, the upper part of the head. It's almost like I'm trying to view this. If I were to throw an overlay on top of all these, and I'm trying to think of them, even though this is a pretty close view between the subject matter and the surface of the picture plane. I'm trying to think of this in terms of, let me put this on multiply. So I'm trying to think of this as a foreground region, a midground, which really is the Gorgon herself, and now, even though the serpent's just to the left hand side of her, these are also considered midground, but at the same time, I'm keeping them, they're on a separate layer, both because it'll make it easier for me in terms of color and for saving this out as a t-shirt, but also Well, I'll show you after I finish dividing this into foreground, midground, background. So I'm dividing this into foreground, midground, and then everything that's going to be behind back there. This is all background. But there's also an additional plane that I'm dealing with, which is there's the plane that's facing the camera and then the plane that's facing up. So this is less about dividing it into regions of foreground, midground, and background. And it's less about that and more about lighting source, because another level, this one I'm just going to drop. Actually, you know what? Let's go to overlay. Perhaps if I do this in white. Oh, that actually looks pretty good. There's also the fact that this is the top surface of the Gorgon. Up here's the top. Here's a top. And then there's these parts of the snakes that are also just sort of a lot of the ground plane is facing upward. Like back here, it's, that's facing upward. So light is going to be coming from above. While once you get back to about here, there's going to be sort of a wall. And then there's going to be serpents going up the wall. So the background, a lot of it is going to be facing the same direction as the face. And this doesn't mean that the face is going to be in shadow the way it looks here. It's just going to be lit as though it's lit from above. So you're still going to see the face. It's more that the top is going to be brighter and then the face is going to be neutral, not necessarily that the face is going to be in shadow. But these are all things that I'm thinking about as I'm inking. As I'm inking, I'm thinking about the foreground, midground, background, and light planes versus neutral or shadow planes. Let's see here. Let's see here. Mercidian Merchant says, I could clearly envision the movie title emblazoned over Medusa's head with a few snakes slithering through its letters. As the art goes. Well, thank you. That is I definitely like that. I mean, that's kind of the feel that I try to go with all of my pieces is, and when you first asked, is this part of a larger piece or a larger series or a larger story? I try to follow the idea of, I try to think of making every single illustration feel like it's a piece that is a moment in time. Like it tells a whole narrative just by itself. That's what I go for. Anyway, that is just something that's happening in my head right now as I'm inking. I'm thinking about these divisions, and I thought it was interesting to show you some stuff that you guys can't see, but that's something that's in my head while I'm drawing this. So I just wanted to share that with you because it's part of the process that is invisible, as it were. All right. So let me keep at these serpents. Sometimes I will be trying to draw a stroke and I'll keep redrawing it and I realize the problem is that I'm just drawing it from the wrong angle and I'm not using the natural arc and curve of my hand. And then I draw it and I realize, no, I liked it better when I was drawing it like this. And I just need to do it and say, all right, that's it, leave it. I still want to keep messing with it. Another thing is trying to make sure that these lines overlap or they hit each other in a way which doesn't create odd tangents. Like I want this region where these lines connect to not create a tangent, but to feel like it is a. I wanted to make sure that it's creating the sense of overlap, not the sense of a bunch of forms hitting each other and you can't tell which one's in front and which one's behind. It's the difference between having a T intersection between two elements versus having two elements that you can't tell if they're side by side, you can't tell which one's in front of the other, you know, poor shape design, poor shape placement rather. I think I'm also trying to make lines that are too long, too fluid in one stroke. Places in here where I've got to fix and a little bit of overlap that went too much in the wrong direction. Let's see here. Kingslow Fitness says, I'm aiming for the invisible to visible for a good while. Got to stop with the references beforehand and go through it after the fact. Read up on manga for a moment on that just to create. Yeah, it's a balancing act between making conscious decisions and letting your subconscious do its work and then trying to analyze and fix afterwards. Because art in itself is a very instinctual act and it's a lot of just how does this feel? But at the same time, a lot of the work is just making decisions. But how do you know in the moment if the decisions you're making are good decisions or bad decisions? And on one hand, you learn by simply making decisions and seeing what the results are. On the other hand, there is an interesting point, and I am still in. It sounds like you're entering something that I've been in. Well, actually, no, because you said you've been dealing with this for a long time. I have never stopped. I've been for the past few years fighting with that balance between knowing what I want something to be, being in the moment versus analyzing as I'm working. And the analyzing as I'm working is the reason why you constantly see me drawing and erasing, drawing and erasing. Um, there's a lot of that. And it's because there's times when in the moment, my instinct can sense something is wrong. And I'm like, let me look at this and just try to adjust it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with listening to your instinct and making those adjustments. But when for me, it's I make that adjustment and it's still not quite right. And it's like Amar has pointed out with my relentless perfectionism. It's when is the point where I've gotten it close enough that I can just stop and move on. Because for me, it's less about perfection and just saying, is it a mistake I could have fixed? Because a lot of times when I see a piece and something is off, I say, all right, let me just adjust that. Let me just fix that thing and I'll fix it and move on. But with things like line weight, that's one of those elements that one could say there's so much subtlety in line weight that it's easy to get caught up in this trap that I'm talking about. Let's see what happens if I put a little right there. Like there's another serpent that's just attaching to the skull right there underneath. This is feeling not horrible, which to me is a win. That is what I will take. When I do a piece, I'm like, oh, that's not horrible. That's probably the nicest thing I can say to myself on any given day. If I walk away, I'm like, yeah, that wasn't horrible. Now, let me go back to how that was before. Just leave it. All right. That is actually coming along about as well as I expected. Like part of my brain, there's a voice in my head that is a lot of times as I'm drawing, it's screaming, it's saying, stop, this is fine, don't do anything else. And I have to listen to that voice and say, all right, let me just step away. And sometimes I'll come back the next day and be like, that wasn't fine, you needed to go a little further. But there are also times when I listen to the voice and I'm glad I did. And the piece was good, it was done. And trying to refine it further would have ruined it. So right now, in my head, I'm lining up sort of, there's a battle between is it good enough and walk away versus you could have gone further, made it better. And that's in terms of the line art. We'll just have to see what happens with the color. We're already at an hour and 4 minutes. So, and I cannot guarantee you that you're not going to come back next week and this piece is going to be completely colored because depending on how much time I have over the course of this week to work, I may just come in and who knows, I might knock out the color super fast. I find that the slower I am in the beginnings of a piece and I make a lot of the careful decisions, like in the sketch phase, in the thumbnail phase, in the line art phase, if I get all of those things working, like if I'm even, like I mentioned about the composition and the lighting, if I get that right, even at the inking stage, sometimes the color is just throwing a little bit of value on there and some flat colors. I'm like, okay, it's done. And another thing that I have been doing is going back and either taking pieces that are more line art oriented like this and doing them as a painting, or I really want to go back. The piece that I showed you that was the painted Gorgon with her lover. I really want to try that in my more traditional comic book style, because this is a debate I've been having with a buddy of mine, coworker Rob, and he definitely is like, dude, the paintings look hot. Keep doing that painting style. He definitely thinks that the reliance that I have, the dependence on line and line art, is just old habits out of being a comic creator, and that the paintings really are something that are cool and vibrant and new and different. At the same time, the stuff that to me looks the strongest tends to be the stuff that's done in the method that I've been working in for many, many years. Like the process that I'm using now, the only thing that's different about this versus the way I work traditionally is simply that all of the sketching and the sketching, the layout, the thumbnails, the pen and the ink, that's all traditional. But my color work is still, I've been doing digital colors for longer than I've been doing finished artwork digitally. So I've got a bit of a workflow, and I've got pieces that feel like, if I had to say what my style is, it's a flat color with minimal rendering, bold, bright colors. But it's that battle between what my existing quote unquote style is and pushing into new areas. Because, the painting still looks like my work, even if it's, it's the same thing, just without quote unquote, without lines per se. So I'm trying to continue pushing that boundary of my regular work as I see it, like my process that I use for making comics, and just applying that to standalone illustrations versus doing stuff that's more painted. I'm playing with both of those. It's funny. So King's Little Fitness says, I'd say don't flip it back to the original. The flip version looks like that's it. Well, what's funny is I have flipped this back and forth so many times that a lot of times it's hard for me to even remember which one is the original direction it was supposed to be in. But that's a good sign. That means that I've worked out the volumes and the composition so that if it doesn't look weird, regardless of which way, well, I mean, to me, I often forget which one is. You might be saying, hey, it looks weird the other way, don't flip it back. Although this, if I remember correctly, what we're looking at right now is flipped. And I think it was flipped when I started. I flipped it back, and now I flipped it to flipped again. And if I remember correctly, let's see here. No, don't do that. If I remember correctly, I think this was my original composition. Point being is that it's a good, to me, it's a good sign if it works either way. But I mean, if you're saying the other way that I had it is better, you might be right. I'm gonna have to marinate on that. So we'll see. But at this point, we're a little over an hour. It's the length of my usual live streams. And by the way, Mercidian Merchant and any other viewers on Twitch, if there's any new viewers, just to let you guys know, I stream at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, so whatever time it is locally. So I'll be back next week to either be finishing up this piece or starting a new one. We'll see. I doubt I'll be done with the comic writing by next week. When I do finish the comic writing, then I'm going to move into character designs and expression poses, start doing some world building before moving into actual thumbnails for the next comic. I'd like to say that I'm going to be at that stage before the end of the year, but we will see. I don't want to make any promises and then let people down. I want people to say, Jeremy's a liar. He ain't never going to draw another comic. I'm working on it. It'll come. All right. So again, thank you everyone for hanging out. Thanks for all the wonderful comments and feedback and conversation as we go. Hope this was interesting for you. Hope that maybe you learned something. Maybe you found something to think about and apply to your work going forward in the future. So if you enjoy these live streams and you don't get enough of me as it is, maybe you want to get 2.5 3-hour-long live streams twice a month. You can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. You get access to what we call Art Book Study Group. It's sessions where we dig into some of the best art books around and do deep dive studies. You also get access to a digital archive of my comic books. So you can read them online. You also get access to a Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share tips, feedbacks, top process, art tools, and more. It's just extending the experience that we're having here in the chat, but it's going on all throughout the week. You get that for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. There's links in the description of the video. For watching on Twitch, there should be links in the About tab. If you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated gifts delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you would like to purchase physical copies of my comic books or read digitally on Comixology or Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. I'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It's a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can also pick up my most recent comic book, Morning Star. It is Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8. Both have extensive back matter, character sketches, thumbnails, page layouts, script excerpts, and more. And you can also see book flip-throughs of all those volumes on the homepage of my YouTube channel. All right, guys, thank you so much for hanging out. I appreciate all the time, the comments, the feedback, the chats, and more. That's it for now. Go be creative.